My name's Chris. I'm the healing minister here at the Cross. And again, I want to just welcome each and every one of you and thank you for bringing the church into this room with you this morning. And I'm excited. I get to kick off this new sermon series, and we're talking about with man, it's impossible, right? And some of you know that. You've tried in your own ability for a long time. With man, it is impossible. With God, we can do all things. And so we're doing this sermon series. We're going to be in the Old Testament. Every year we like to do an Old Testament series. This is going to be like a bunch of little standalone messages where we're picking a character or a story that really shows us how God shows up. And how if God doesn't show up, this thing ain't going to work out. And so we're going to be diving into that this morning. So we're going to start with a real unscientific poll, right? So you can raise your hand. How many of you just love waiting? Yeah, right. Oh, Sidge, awesome. So good. One. So good. Love waiting, right? We've been waiting for the storm. You've been waiting for cleanup. You've been waiting for help. You've been waiting for all kinds of things. Man, hurricanes are weird, right? I'm from California. Earthquakes you can't plan for, right? Just the ground starts shaking. Here we're like, we know it's coming. It's weird, right? It's like the serial killer's like, I'm coming Tuesday morning. And you're like, bro, it's scary. It's terrifying. And then just the wind is whipping. It's just, and we're in like the middle of the state, man, and it was loud, right? So prayers to everyone out there on the coast and everyone who still doesn't have power. Again, waiting on power to come back. But how many of you just love waiting? Like for you, a good time is like a doctor's office with a bunch of outdated magazines and bad coffee, right? Nobody wants that. We are not good at waiting. We love to skip the line. We love a fast pass. We hate being put on hold. And yet we also say things like, good things come to those who are impatient. No, wait, right. That's what we say. But we humans, man, we move at a pretty good clip. We are always careening into the future. And I don't know if we've ever been more about instant gratification than we are now. I think our whole culture could be diagnosed with ADHD. That's where we are right now. And I feel this all the time, right? Like if I need to change lanes, right? Like at the supermarket, and you're just watching people check out like crazy over there. And you're like, this guy's got a coupon, and everyone's checking out. And then you get in that line. And then everyone starts moving in this line, right? And it's the same thing with like you're driving. Same thing, we were parking at Disney a while ago, and I'm like, and just everyone's going. I'm like, well, they're all getting on the rides. And then we get in that lane, everyone starts moving over here, just so impatient. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want us to look at a story that we may know well, but I want us to see it from another angle. And my hope is that we come away with a better understanding of what it means to wait on the Lord. A little different than just waiting on the Lord. So we're going to be in 1 Samuel all morning. And for some of you, maybe you're like, 1 Samuel, I don't even know what that is. What is that? If we want you in the Bible, you're like Samuel L. Jackson. No, 1 Samuel 1 and 2. We're going to eventually get into 2, but we're going to mostly be in 1 Samuel. So I want to give us some backstory so you can understand what we're going to dive into. 1 Samuel focuses on three main characters. The prophet Samuel, where the book gets its name, King Saul, and then eventually King David. And this book shows us the transition of Israel from a group of tribes ruled by judges into a unified kingdom, eventually ruled by King David in Jerusalem. And we start the story by meeting Hannah. Now, Hannah had to wait on the Lord. Hannah wanted to have children, couldn't have children. And eventually, by the grace of God, gives birth to Samuel, her son. And so all of her joy is from all of that time waiting on the Lord. And she gives us this beautiful poem. And this poem shows us how God opposes the proud and exalts the humble. And this is a theme we're going to see throughout this story, that the proud will rush the promises of God, while the humble will wait on the Lord. So let's hear her poem. It's beautiful. Then Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord, my horn is lifted high. So we've been in Revelation for a while. We know horn means strength. My strength is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly or let your mouth speak such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. And we're going to skip to verse 9. He will guard the feet of his faithful servants, but the wicked will be silenced in the place of darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Samuel grows up and he becomes this great prophet and he's this leader in Israel. And at the same time, the Philistines are rising to power and they're the arch nemesis of Israel. And so then there's this battle early in 1 Samuel where the Philistines are fighting the Israelites. And during the fight, they don't like go and pray to God. They're like, we got an idea. We're just going to bring out the Ark of the Covenant. Like, you know, some of you are like Indiana Jones, that one. The close your eyes, Marion, that ark, right? So like it's going to do that and just melt the faces of all the Nazis, right? So it's that ark and they bring it out. I don't know who's here. You know what I mean? Some of you are like, I never read a Bible, but I saw the movie. Cool, that's where we're at. Ark of the Covenant gets rolled out, and they're like, that's going to work. It doesn't work. They lose the battle, and not only that, God is so kind of upset with the fact that they thought that that would work, that the ark gets stolen, too. It's like the worst case scenario, worst outcome. God eventually defeats the Philistines, and he does this by sending plagues to them. And so all these plagues start killing them. So, you know, they're like, we don't want this ark anymore. So they slap a shipping label on that deal. They pay for shipping. They send it right back to Israel. We don't want this. But what is driven home, it existed then, Amazon Prime, you didn't know. What is driven home is that Israel needs to remain humble and obedient if they want to experience God's covenant blessing. Yet after all of this, the nation of Israel just goes, you know, we just want to be like every other nation. And God is like, I'm setting you apart to not look like every other nation. But they want to look like every other nation. So the Israelites go to Samuel and they go, we want a king. Everyone else has a king. We want a king. We want a king like everyone else. Samuel's not thrilled about this. Goes to God and goes, can you believe these guys? I'm paraphrasing here. And God essentially goes, I know, their heart's all wrong, you know. But you know what? They want a king. Let's give them a king, right? They want a king. We'll do it, right? And so enter Saul into the chat, right? So now King Saul comes in, and he's a good-looking king, man. He's tall. He's good-looking. He is like the perfect candidate, other than the fact that he is totally morally corrupt and has a bunch of character flaws. Other than that, though, he's great, right? So, I mean, he's dishonest. He lacks integrity. He seems incapable of acknowledging his own mistakes, but man, he looks great. You know what I mean? He just looks great. And I think this is God going, hey, if you want a trophy ark, right? You want a trophy God? I'm going to give you a trophy king, right? Deal with this. Take the trophy king. And Saul starts out pretty good. He wins some battles, but his character flaws, they run deep. He eventually disqualifies himself by blatantly disobeying God's commands. So Samuel confronts him, and he goes, listen, if you're going to be a good king, you need to be humble. You need to be humble. Humble wasn't really Saul's thing. It just was not his deal. I know I've lost some Gen Zers here, so we'll admit. He starts out a dub with tons of riz. Saul's big yikes, and he grows super salty over David and gives him the ick. Is that good? I have no idea what I just said. Okay. But I got some of you back. Okay, meanwhile, God is working behind the scenes to raise up this new king, this young shepherd boy named David. And so the Lord sends Samuel to go anoint him, that he will be the future king. 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, right? Exactly what Saul was, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so here he is. He's now been anointed. Like there's the promise. You are going to be the king. And shortly after this, King Saul even likes David, man. He summons him to come play the lyre for him, right? He's like, I'm a liar, but you can play the lyre, right? So let's do this thing. And I'm having evil thoughts and just come and soothe me. And David does that. He's just like a minstrel. He's rocking out. I don't know. It's probably the beginning of Stairway to Heaven. And he's doing that for him, and he loves it. And then shortly after that, we get the story of David and Goliath, which we're not even going to go into, but realize that even that story encapsulates that the proud Philistine is going to lose to the humble David. Constantly we see proud versus humble. And most scholars believe that David was about 13 to 16 years old when he defeated Goliath. Crazy. I know. I'm playing 10U baseball with my kids. I'm like, he defeated Goliath, man. You can stand up there and swing the bat, right? Okay. So David quickly becomes this rock star in the culture. Here it is, 1 Samuel 18:6-9. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out of the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands. That's awesome. And David his tens of thousands. Uh-oh. Saul didn't like that. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. Man, what a child. Okay, so what more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close, some translations say, a jealous eye on David. And so it begins. And David's working for Saul as a general. He's winning all kinds of battles, but he's also winning all kinds of fame. And so Saul gets more and more jealous. And then he makes it known that he wants David killed. It's that bad. Like, David's helped him out a ton. He's been great, and now he wants him killed. So Jonathan, who is Saul's son, also really good friends with David, convinces his dad, don't harm him, right? This lasts for like 10 seconds. Okay, so I'll show you. Here it is, 1 Samuel 19, 6 through 10. Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. It's an oath. Watch how quickly this collapses. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. So Jonathan called David, told him the whole conversation, not on the phone. That looks weird. He didn't have a phone. He called to him. So he brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. So now things are back to normal. Once more, war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them down with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul, and he was sitting in the house with his spear in his hand. And while David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with a spear. But David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. It's just strange. This was the very first, boy, that escalated quickly. Man, that got really out of hand fast. Saul, did I just see you try to kill David with a trident? You should lay low for a while. All right, some of you got that. Okay, look, we need to remember, David has done absolutely nothing wrong here. And yet Saul wants him dead, but it's here that we see David's true character. Right? The late, great Tom Petty once said, the waiting is the hardest part, and he was right. And once David is on the run, it opens up this entirely new season for David, a season of waiting on the Lord. David is now forced to flee from Saul's murderous and jealous pursuit. He's traveling from city to city. Sometimes he is in the wilderness. David had every reason to think that God had abandoned him, but he holds on to God's promise. And because of that, this story of David being on the run can encourage us to truly trust God more fully, that despite human evil and sin in the world, God is working out his purpose to oppose the proud and to exalt the humble. I know I used to think that waiting was just doing nothing. We're never doing nothing. Most of us now, if we have to wait for a little bit, we're just like, whoa, pull up the phone. Right? This is what we're going to do now. Just going to live here, check my email, scroll on social media. Like, what did we do before? just out of curiosity. Do people like just sit there, think, talk to each other? What did we used to do? It's kind of crazy, right? If you think about it now, just go look around, go to a restaurant, look around. You're like, everyone's on their phone, and they're not checking the menu. What are they doing? No one's talking to each other. It's weird. But we're never doing nothing. Even when you are sleeping, you are breathing, and you are dreaming. We are always busy doing something. So what I want to do for the rest of our time this morning is show us that waiting on the Lord is different than just waiting. And I want to use David as our model and showing us also what waiting on the Lord is not. So I think we can learn a little bit more what it is by ruling some stuff out. All right, so we're going to start here. Waiting on the Lord is not passivity. Waiting on the Lord is not passivity. While waiting on the Lord is certainly a passive posture, but we can get confused that I'm just called to wait. I'm just going to sit here and wait. But we need to see that David's season of waiting on the Lord was an act of obedience. It was an act of faith. David didn't just sit around and do nothing. What do I mean? Think about it. So David's already been anointed by Samuel when he was young. Before he was brought into the king's court to play music for him, before he slayed David and Goliath, he knew he's going to be king. Think of that. You've been anointed. Here's the promise. You're going to be king. I can guarantee you that this is not the way he thought it would go down. Being on the run from a jealous and murderous king. This is not what he would have picked. And remember, David didn't do anything wrong. He didn't sin towards Saul. Saul was just jealous. That's it. He was threatened. Some scriptures say that Saul had a really big truck with like a lift on it. You know what I mean? Like insecure. You know what I'm saying? Lake County, that's a dangerous joke. Okay. I used to have a big truck. It's okay. All right, we're going back. It's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's good. We're not even live streaming right now, so we're good. I can say whatever I want. No, we're recording still, so we'll cut that part out. Okay. Saul was insecure, right? David is like in his early 20s at this point, and Saul wants him dead. So what does David do? Well, we know what he doesn't do. He doesn't see himself as, and he doesn't play the victim. Oh, he could have. Come on. He could have played the victim. Like, where's God? He's abandoned me. What should I do? Poor me, with his like little instrument, with his lyre. He's like hitting the road. He could have just played the victim, and he doesn't. In fact, it doesn't even cross his mind. He gets busy moving. He's acquiring supplies like food and weapons. Eventually, he has other men join him. In fact, he behaves more like a king than the king does at this time. David was on the run, but he wasn't running away from God. He was on the run with God. He was running with God. Waiting on the Lord doesn't mean distance from God. On the contrary, waiting on the Lord will drive you closer to God. And when I think of this time in biblical history, I think about how David must have felt. Right? David is alone. He's on the run. He's literally watching the privileged life that he lived in the king's court, a road away in front of him. What would this have felt like? Well, we know, because David did the most masculine thing you can do. He journaled. Yeah, that's right. And he wrote songs and poetry. Man, we're reclaiming that, right? So the fact that could be like a joke, be like, oh, he's writing songs. Like he was a lover and a fighter, right? David felt feelings, men, right? He felt his feelings. He knew what he felt. Like he didn't need a feeling wheel, right? He wrote out poetry and songs, right? In a journal, right? I've asked men to write a journal. Like, oh, I'm not going to keep a diary. I'm like, so that's not a good start. And first of all, yeah, you do need to journal. Look, in my darkest moments, I kept a journal. And I can look back on it now and see God's promises. I can see prayers that were answered. I can see prayers that, man, I'm glad you didn't answer that. That was a bad idea. I thought that was a good, thank you, Garth Brooks. Unanswered prayers, so good. We're getting a lot of musical references today. But men, if you are struggling, write a journal. This is what David did. And so we know how he felt. So this psalm was written right as he was on the run. This is Psalm 34. He says this, I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. And we're going to skip to verse 17 and 18. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. David isn't writing this psalm after he has been delivered. He's still on the run. When he writes this psalm, he hasn't been delivered from all of his troubles. How can he say this? Because he knows that God's promises are true. God cannot break a promise. And David is also eternally minded. Right? God is outside of time, so much bigger than our current circumstances that David finds himself in. David isn't just waiting and like half-heartedly hoping that God will show up. He is waiting in anticipation to witness what he knows only God can do. And so he is praying, he is singing, he is writing, he is worshiping. And so waiting on the Lord is an action. It's not passive. It takes obedience to wait well. And yet our sinful impatience can pull us out of a spiritual waiting season. But why? Well, because while it is true that waiting on the Lord is not passivity, waiting on the Lord will not be painless. It will not be painless. Waiting on the Lord takes sacrifice, and there'll be many opportunities to give up waiting on the Lord. There are so many different off-ramps to try, so many shortcuts to God's promises. So let's see how David handles this. There's this significant event that occurs in the story when God brought Saul and David together in a cave in the wilderness. And Saul had taken 3,000 men in pursuit of David. Think of that. I think at most David had 400 at one point. 3,000 men are chasing him, and unknowingly he puts himself in a very vulnerable spot when he goes into a cave. And he goes into this cave to do a thing. So he's going to go, why is he in the cave? Well, I'll tell you, I'll just read the scripture. 1 Samuel 24:3. He came to the sheep's pen along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went to relieve himself. Okay. David and his men were far back in the cave. Okay, that's cool. That's why I love the Bible, right? Listen, man, you can go number one anywhere. If you're going in a cave, you're doing something else. I just want, like, his time is going to be taken. You know, I just want you to understand. This is in the Bible, y'all. You should read it. It's really good. It said, I didn't say it. It said it. This is the word of God. Okay, so he's in there, and Saul doesn't know that David and his men are hiding in this cave. Think about this. I'd be like, this is it, right? Like, this is the moment. David has the perfect opportunity to kill Saul. And what would have made it even harder is that his men are encouraging him to do it, right? The wait is over. Kill Saul and become the king. But David would not. He recognized that Saul was still the Lord's anointed, and so David would not harm him. Let's read. The men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Okay, this would have been so difficult if I'm David to hear that from my men who are also waiting, right? They're also in a cave. They're like, this is it, man. Do it. And so I think David's like, okay, I'm going to do it. So he starts going. Then David crept unnoticed, and I think something changes here, and he cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. So even doing that, he's like, I shouldn't even have done that. I shouldn't even have done that. And then he says to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, my lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground and said to Saul, why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in this cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord because he is the Lord's anointed. David understood that even though Saul was governed by fear and hate, he was still God's chosen king, and only God could remove him from office. David declared that he would not harm Saul, though Saul had tried to kill him on multiple occasions. David simply put the matter in the Lord's hands and chose him, said, you dispense justice. It's in your time. And this is so Christ-like, right? We see this, not my will, but yours be done. That had to be a painful decision. I don't know how he did it. His own men, who are also on the run with him in a cave, wanting the situation to end, they're like, kill him, man. This is the moment. And David didn't do it. And David is justified in doing it. I mean, he's literally on the run for nothing. He didn't do anything wrong. It's like a jealous, murderous king. So despite being in danger, being hungry, being tired, being pursued, being pressured, David kept his focus on what God told him. How did this feel? Well, let's check his journal. He left it for us, so we'll read his journal. This is what he wrote in the cave, Psalm 142, 1-7. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble. Let me just stop there. That's what this looks like. Having a prayer and a conversation when things are hard with God. Remember, he's on the run with God. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. He's talking about Saul. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me, right? His men are like, do it. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. And then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. Waiting on the Lord, he's saying, can feel like a prison. Oh man, but know who you're in that prison with. God is with him. He can write to him. He can take his cares. He goes, I know I'm not alone in this. I know you've given me a promise. I'm going to hold on to it. And God will never ask you to do something against his word. Pastor Mark, Pastor Jacob have spoken about this multiple times on Sundays, that when we get in the most trouble is when we try to shortcut or rush the promises of God. When we are like, I'm going to do it my own way. I'm going to do it my own ability. I'm not going to wait. I know he gave me this promise, but I mean, come on, it should be time about now. I'm going to rush that promise. The Lord told me this. Oh, he did. He said that to you? Wow. Okay. I haven't looked at my Bible in years, but I'm guaranteed this is what he told me. I'm like, that's scary. Who'd you run that off? Who did you bounce that off? Well, no one. I don't have any community. God's telling me to do this. Maybe. I'm not even saying he's not, but like, that'd be weird. It'd be a weird way for him to do it. He wants to talk to you through the people around you that he has provided around you and through his word. That is how we know. Should I be moving? Should I not be moving? How do I know to wait on the Lord? Isaiah 26:8. Yes, Lord, walking in the way of your laws, we wait for you. Your name and your renown are the desire of our hearts. God's glory should always be the desire of our hearts. God only has the best intentions for us. He has the absolute best intentions for us. So when we wait on God, we are waiting for the best answer. When we are rushing God and we're trying to do it our own way, first it's going to take longer. Every time you think it's a shortcut, it's going to take a lot longer. But are we hearing truly from God before we make a move? The king said this very thing. He said, wise men say, only fools rush. That's a king. He's not the King of Kings. I had to get some of you back with Elvis. I lost some of you earlier. That's all right. It's a sort of a king. Look, only fools rush in. David had to dig deep, man, to not kill Saul in that cave. He trusted the Lord in his season of waiting. So waiting on the Lord is not passivity. It's an action. Waiting on the Lord will not be painless. And finally, I think we really need to hear this. Waiting on the Lord is not wasted time. It's not wasted time. I know I can get caught up in this, like feeling this rush, like, man, my time's getting wasted, so I got to go do a thing. And that's when I get in the most trouble. I get impatient because I feel like the time is being wasted, like we're not getting it back, right? Like, okay, I want to go. And so I'm rushing and rushing because I feel like the time is being wasted. And yet we know that God uses everything for the good. He uses all of it. God uses this time right now for David to not make him the king that he wants to be, but to make him the king that he needs to be. He is transforming him while he is on the road. Again, it's not the way David would have chose it. There's no way he's picking, this is the way I need to do it. God goes, this is what I'm going to use to grow you. This is what I'm going to use to train you. There's a king that I need you to be. But none of it's wasted. All of that time is used for the good. Romans 8:28. This is the English Standard Version. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. Some manuscripts read, God works all things together for good, or God works in all things for the good. Again, David would have never chosen to prepare himself by being on the run from a murderous and jealous king. But that is exactly what happens in a season of waiting. God molds us. He transforms us. Pastor Jacob, Pastor Mark, and I were talking as we were preparing for this message, and we've been at this church around 10 years now. And I remember when I first got here, I knew God had a call in my life. He's like, you're going to do recovery work. You're going to be a therapist. This is what you're going to do. But 10 years ago, I was still taking classes and doing this thing, right? But I also knew I was called into ministry. And so I started working here at the church. I was a communication director. I have no business being the communication director, right? I was up here singing songs, leading worship, right? As soon as I saw call, I was like, you in here, you're here. There's no way you were both in South Africa and now in Lake County and you're not meant to do ministry together. Mark and call, get together, right? It's amazing. But so some of you are like, oh, he sings every now and then. That's what I was doing. I was singing songs and doing communication. That was not my deal. It's not what I was supposed to be doing. But I was doing that. I was in a season of waiting. I knew that God's like, but I have this other thing for you. It's only in the last few years here at this church that I really feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing here, right? Just put your hand to the plow and just do it. And there were multiple times where I was like, this doesn't look like this is changing. I'm going to be just updating Facebook for the rest of my life for this church. What am I actively doing, right? This is not helping anybody. It's certainly not helping my mental health. Like, I am out of here. Like, that is what I felt. And I had good people like Jacob and Mark going, just settle down, man. It's all good. You're going to be good. Trust God. I am trusting him. Just, I'm totally trusting him in faith. Faith. Yeah, no, it was hard. But I see the blessing of it now. And so for so many of us, that's where we are. We're going, man, but should I be doing this? Look, the guys know this. I talked to all the guys hand in hand in the house. They're like, forget this idea that it's a year-long program, man. Just set roots for the next 5 years. This program is just the first year of those 5 years, right? Like, give yourself a chance. And we're just like, nope, I'm better. Leave. And then it crashes and burns. It's like, set some roots, man. Like, gosh, we want it so quick. We want to do it in our own ability, in our own way. Realize that David never takes Saul's life. In fact, Saul takes his own life. He ends up falling on his own sword. Saul can't even wait to die in battle. He can't even wait to do that. He's too proud for that. But remember Hannah's poem from the beginning. He will guard the feet of his faithful servants, but the wicked will be silenced in the place of darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Could it be that God has you in a season of waiting, just like David, simply to transform you into who he has called you to be? And meanwhile, you don't even know it, but he's taking down all your enemies and all your barriers. And he's doing it for you. And then you're like, I got to get in there and do it. He's like, you can't do it like I can do it. I can take care of that for you. David never has to touch Saul. He takes care of himself. Because why? David just believed and he trusted on the Lord. He waited on the Lord. Eventually, he becomes the king. 2 Samuel 5, 1-3. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, we are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on the military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he finally became king, and he reigned for 40 years. You know, when you read through 1 Samuel and you get to that part in 2 Samuel, like if you read about 300 words a minute, it'll take you 45 minutes, maybe an hour to read everything that we just covered, and there's a ton that goes on in there. But you can just read it and just think, oh, he was on the run and he was just doing this thing. David was on the run for 7 years. 7 years he was doing this. I mean, I know some of us have been out of power for 7 days, man. He was in caves for 7 years on the run from a murderous king. David was waiting on the Lord for 7 years. But he was doing more than that. David was waiting on purpose. And he was waiting on his purpose, the purpose that God would have for him. 7 long years, painful years of waiting. But David was not passive, and none of his time was wasted. So how long am I supposed to wait on the Lord? That's a good question. Look, I don't know how long God has called you to wait. I also don't know what he's preparing you for. It may take a little longer if he's preparing you for something big, but I know this. I know he has a purpose. He 100% has a purpose for you. Ephesians 2:10. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do.